if the first reasoning clicked for you, a whole lot would come together, and it would indeed have an impact. But from the descriptions of the realization of emptiness, along with that click would would go a thud. Like, you know. Excuse me?
It wouldn't be going a thud, I think it would be coming a thud.
All right. Coming a thud. A thud would be a coming. So remember His Holiness's description of lightning coursing in his heart, and it even hurting for a number of days. You know, the word impact must be good. So Nagarjuna has assembled a number of reasonings. But they are in groups, and then the groups are distinct. And Chandrakirti informs us of how the groups go together. And Tsongkhapa, beyond that, which is in the beginning of the text that you have, further points out how the groups hang together. So even if there's a full reasoning in that first stanza, there's an overarching full answer that is contained in a number of stanzas. So now somebody comes back and says, and it's worded more like, if you think, which I rendered as question. So if you think the being gone over is being gone over, you know, this is an objection or a qualm. I haven't gone back over the Tibetan to bring the translation up to date, but I'm not dissatisfied by how, you know, when I read it over, I'm not dissatisfied with what's here. In fact, there may be some benefit to the, you know, Jeffrey Jr. The being gone over is being gone over. And then you get, this is Chandrakirti's lead in from the so-called, what I call the person in the street. And the person's argument is where there's movement, switches the vocabulary from going to movement. Where there's movement, there's going. And it's on the being gone over of a goer. So we get the vocabulary of the goer. Not on the gone over, nor on the not yet gone over. Yeah, it's not on the gone over. It's not on the not yet gone over. Therefore, going is on the being gone over. And then the quam continues. Here in this case, movement means the raising and putting down of the foot. Like, duh. Are you going to deny this? On an area where there is movement of a goer who is proceeding, there is going on that area also. This movement does not occur on the path already gone over, nor on the path not yet gone over, but is just on the being gone over. And so this is a repetition, these last two, this sentence. Chandrakirti's version of repeating what the stanzas already said is very mild. It's just poetry into prose. Some Sanskrit scholars will take you word by word, and then they'll sum it up and put it into a sentence. And in one way, it's super boring if you already know what the poetry means. And it's another way, it's super laborious and thus boring. You almost can't take it. But in another way, if you can slow down, it's super beautiful. Because every word, you get told what a foot means. You get told what an area means. It just knocks you. It's like, oh wow. I don't need to go to the dictionary. Or maybe you have to go to the dictionary for every word in the sentence that tells you what a foot means, in order to read the Sanskrit or to read the Tibetan, And thus it's laborious in that it makes you work to read the most common things. And the conclusion is extremely common. When I took my Sanskrit comprehensive exam, Richard Robinson, his library was behind him, and he reached like this to his library. He was looking at me, and he didn't choose the Sanskrit book. He just reached back, and his hand picked one. And he looked to see what his hand chose. And it was one of these super laborious ones. And he just opened it up in the middle, and he said, "Translate this," and handed it to me. And it was Haribhadra's super laborious commentary on Maitreya's ornament for the clear realizations. Well, fortunately, I was familiar from looking at the Tibetan of this kind of commentary. So the type of commentary didn't throw me. And I realized right away what type of... I'd never looked at this Sanskrit text. So when I handed in my translation, he said, "Oh, this is very good. I'm really surprised." He gave a quick look and he said, "Oh, terrific." Oh my gosh. So Chandrakirti is nothing like that. So, but you have to realize what's going on, like in this sentence. He's just repeating poetry and prose. Thus, there is going on the being gone over. At that point, I was using thus with two meanings, which is bad. Thus meaning therefore, and thus meaning in this way. And that's bad. This is probably therefore. For means because. I still do that. But I'll tend nowadays to if the sentence can stand it, I'll just say because some people don't recognize that for means because, indicates reason. Even there was one editor who didn't realize that when it means because, and is not a preposition, you put a comma after it. For the place where going is apprehended is the being gone over. Apprehended, you see, is another word for gum. He's glossing gum, meaning is known, is apprehended. But he wants to use apprehended rather than is known, and is being affected by the action of going. The area is being affected by the action of going. This is the opponent's opinion. And Nagarjuna is saying is not apprehended. And the area is not being affected by the action of going. So Chandrakirti is giving a double meaning to double meaning to the gum is not apprehended and is not being affected by the action of going. Thus, here's another, thus, and you see here I am, the translator, and I don't know whether it means in that way or therefore. So, it's a bad translation equivalent. In my own system, if I, the translator, 30, 40, 50 years later, don't know which it means. Just the being gone over, this is the opponent's position, is being gone over. In this case, the one root gum, in gamyamane, the being gone over, has the sense of knowing that the area is being affected by an action of going. The other root gum in gati means proceeding to another place. I have a qualm about of a goer up there. Of a goer. Where did of a goer in the stanza come from? Cheshta yatra gatis tatra gamimane chasa yataha nagate nagate cheshta gamimane gatis tataha gatis. It's going. I'm going to hunt that out. So the answer is, even though you ascribe it that way, posit it that way, posit is the word nowadays, but anyway, the being gone over is not being gone over. What? I mean, you know, our reaction should be, what? What do you mean the being gone over is not being gone over? How could I get there if I'm not going over the being gone over? You asked me to go to the kitchen and check on those awful lentils you keep making me eat every day. I've developed a dislike for lentils. I'm wondering if my hands are getting somewhat better. I've stopped eating lentils. Thus Nagarjuna says, all it says is, I believe, uchyate, it is said. So I was making it easier to say. How indeed would going be feasible on the being gone over, when two goings are not feasible on the being gone over? What? Two goings? You mean I gotta bring a friend? What are you talking about? Are you crazy? Gamyamanasya, it's interesting. Gamyamanasya gamanam katam namopapasyate. Gamyamane dvigamanam yada naivopapadyate. So, I mean, the Sanskrit is simply fun. The Tibetan, frankly, doesn't hold a candle to it. Gomla doa, but it says it. Gomla doa yimani jidapuna tebagyor. Kangse doa mebayi gomba teba mechero. But the Sanskrit to me reads like you're reading a joke. Yeah. Gamyamanasya gamanam katam namopapadyate. Gamyamane dvigamanam yada naivopapadyate. The Sanskrit is basically two lines composed of each of two half lines. The Tibetan is 4 lines. You know, if each Sanskrit line is composed of 2 half lines, it makes sense for the Tibetan to be composed of 4 lines. I'm not complaining about that. It's just a fact. But the Tibetan is, the Sanskrit has euphonic weight to it that the Tibetan doesn't have. As Tibetans say, Sanskrit is the language of the gods. And it has a complexity of the verb that Tibetan simply doesn't have. Just simply doesn't have. And then you take 1,000 steps down to Chinese. So you take Not that I know Chinese, but I have a few. Huh?
Where is English in this?
Where is English in this?
English.
Well, English is an Indo-European language. It's a younger sister to Sanskrit. So, what did I say? 100 to Tibetan. 75 to English. 75 steps down. In terms of well, I mean, you know, Nagarjuna was writing in Sanskrit. So, what can you do? But if you're going to debate Buddhism, well, yeah, okay.
Jeffrey,
Yes.
big universities,
Excuse me?
at Nalanda and so forth, did they debate in Sanskrit or did they debate in their local language?
Oh.
Just throw this.
I don't know, but I assume in Sanskrit. But what was going through my mind is, were they there's Buddhist Sanskrit and this, which is a Prakrit, and there's the Sanskrit that Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti are writing in, as opposed to, I'm getting in over my head. The sutras, all sutras, are in Buddhist Sanskrit, which is, Buddhist Sanskrit.
Can I, as
Yes.
I understand it, when they were translating or in the Buddhist hybrid, anything that was closer to a canonical text, they would maintain that Prakrit element. But for the original philosophical works, they tended to go with a more Panini, the classical Sanskrit. That's
Yeah.
how I understand.
Yes. Well,
They're
that's,
probably debating in classical Sanskrit, where if they have to quote something, it would have the Prakrit kind of sense to it, perhaps.
well, thank you. That's exactly what I wanted to say, but was hesitant to say it as strongly as you were. So you're confirming what I wanted to say. When at the end of this chapter we read quotes from Sutra, they're in Buddhist hybrid Sanskrit. So, just as Vicky is saying, Chandrakirti preserves the Buddhist hybrid Sanskrit, which is a looser commoners form of Sanskrit. And classical is a good word for the type of Sanskrit that Chandrakirti was writing in and Nagarjuna is writing in. More formal. And so, no, there's no and so. And so this brings up the point that when one wants to know where these reasonings are found in the sutras, you turn to the quotes that Chandrakirti gives at the ends of chapters. And I carefully using my words, because does he give them at the ends of all chapters, or most, or some, I forget. I'll venture to say all chapters. And so I had a sense that you're not going to find the reasonings in many sutras, but then had to correct myself that, well, Chandrakirti's got a lot of quotations at the ends of these chapters. So we better look there before we get too far out on a limb. Now, when it comes to the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, how many reasonings are there in those? Now, that's I will say there's probably not too many. But then there are a whole lot of other sutras that are quoted, for sure. But how many are there in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras? That's a good question. How many of the reasonings are found there? So, Nagarjuna, Chandrakirti here, in fleshing this out, you accept the designation, the being gone over, just because of its having an action of going. And you say that the being gone over is being gone over. So now, among these many reasonings, which one are you going to find appeals to your mind more? Now, in fact, we could take a poll. Now, that's not going to tell us in general which one is better, but just as a matter of interest, it would be interesting for us to, I actually, share which ones appeal to you. That's not going to determine which one's better. I'm not going to let you choose which one's better for me. But it'll be interesting to know. And even if you could articulate why this one appeals to you individually, I don't mean as a group, and why one doesn't appeal to you. Like, this one's full of crap. Because, your honest reaction. The first one was really good. It really challenged me. Now this one is full of crap. It just doesn't go anywhere. Now, and you could say, and it really challenges me about the first one that makes me feel the first one shouldn't have challenged me, because every one of these should challenge me. I say you're wrong. If the first one challenges you, go with it. If the second one doesn't, it doesn't mean every one of them should challenge you equally. It depends on your setup. What you could say the second one is truly bogus. Now that makes me think Nagarjuna was a charlatan. And if he's a charlatan on the second one, that means he's likely a charlatan on the first one. So I'm not even going to use the first one. And I was starting to get a thought on the first one. And I'm afraid of the first one. So I'm going to let the charlatan sense keep me from the first one. Do you follow? That's how our emotions work. Now I'm putting words to your emotions that you are unwilling to say. In other words, putting words to maybe my own emotions. But also, Ian Stevenson at the University of Virginia went around the world collecting rebirth stories. And he was convinced by one that another friend of mine thought was totally bogus. And concluded from that Ian could be convinced by totally bogus, you see, as a scientist, could be convinced by totally bogus evidence. And so the second friend, who had communist leanings, and so totally, non-rebirth oriented, used that as evidence that all of Ian's findings were wrong. That just wiped it out for him. Well, frankly, I thought my second friend, even though I was willing to admit that he could or was right about that particular story, he should go through the ones that really look good, such as, evidence from the Chicago Police Department of, somebody remembering a lifetime in the past of being, I don't know what it was, cut with a knife in the throat, and then, being able to remember that life, and the police department pulling out the evidence, the picture, and the person was reborn with a scar on the throat right here, and go through that evidence and show that one was bogus also. So I'm not drawing a parallel here, but see, I'm drawing some sort of parallel. In other words, even if one doesn't work for you, then go back to the one that was appealing. And then maybe later, this one that seems very superficial will in time work. Maybe it will. Okay. But the fact that Nagarjuna's got a whole lot of reasonings, the fact that one isn't going to appeal to you, that's not the reason to drop it. Drop the whole enterprise. Maybe it's the reason to use one or two or 5 or 10 or 15 or however many it is that do seem to work, and then see if later this one that doesn't seem to work will work. Okay, you get my point. That's a suggestion. However, it is not feasible to accept. So he says there's some reason why there's going to have to be two goings, are not feasible on the being going over. Okay, well, we have to face the fact that seems to be utter nonsense, what Nagarjuna is saying. You accept the designation the being gone over just because of its having an action of going. Yeah, right. And you say that the being gone over is being gone over. Yup, you're right. In that case, there is one action of going, right? There's one action of going. There's one person going, and that's me. And that action of going is affecting the area. And due to it, let us allow the path to be designated the being gone over. Now remember, we're getting used to Chandrakirti's style. He's saying, yeah, there's one action of going, and it's affecting the area being gone over. And he's like a lawyer, right? On the stand, and you know you're being trapped. You know you're being trapped, but you've got to be willing to say yes. You know how it is when you're arguing with somebody and they know they're being trapped, so they're unwilling to nod their head, unlike Vicky, who's nodding. They're unwilling to nod their head on anything, to say yes, because they know they're being trapped. But that's the dumb way to go about it. You can't talk with the person because they're not willing to admit the obvious. Like, it's sunny today. And they'll go, no, because I know you're trapping me. We're inside the apartment. No. And you know, you think I'm talking to a fucking idiot. You know, you've got a hair across your ass, I can't talk to you, goodbye. And then the other person says, oh, you're just angry. However, it is not feasible for a further is being gone over, to have a relation with an action on the being gone over. And then you get, what? How indeed? Then you go justifiably, it's what? What are you talking about? Now it's justified. Thus Nagarjuna says, how indeed would going be feasible on the being gone over? And you say, well, look, I just admitted that there's a going, and that's what makes this area the being gone over. Okay. When two goings over, yeah, and then you say, you're justified in saying, look, I don't get it. Okay. The being gone over means that which is presently being gone over. And then you have to say, yes. Two goings means two acts of going. And you have to know when to admit, when not to admit, when it gets insane. Two goings means two acts of going. And you can't say, I'm not going to admit to that. I mean, two goings means two acts of going. Yes. And you've got to know when you're being shown the trap, which is when you say no. The one action of going is used for the being gone over. Yes. Yes, dear. Yes, dear. I know you're trying to trap me, but that's not where the trap is. I already admitted to this one, so I'll say yes. The one action of going is used for the being gone over. And there is no second action of going. Yes, I'm only one person. I got one action of going. Therefore, when the designation is being gone over, is not feasible without a going. Yes. The meaning of the statement, the being gone over is being gone over, is not complete. Now we used up my going to make it the being gone over. Now when we say is being gone over, where is that going? Where is that? Where's the going that allows me to say is being gone over? Vicky is getting word. This is Nagarjuna's thought. So this is where we're being caused to think. Since there is no second action, only being gone over, that's the area, exists. Is being gone over. Does not. I can hear my mother in the kitchen saying to me, "You're too literal. You're too literal." You're too literal. You're too literal. So maybe you think this is too grammatical, or did something click, or I'm willing to entertain that, or what is the person in the street saying? Or, this is being carried out more. The person in the street comes back to say, is being gone over. It's not just the area, but the is being gone over is related with the action of going. If so, Nagarjuna comes back and says, the being gone over would not be related with it. You just got one action of going. So is it affecting the area, or is it with the person, the being gone, the action? Thereby, the meaning of the statement, the being gone over is being gone over, you can see why people think this is an examination of language only. You can see why they don't think this is an examination of things. We're in the middle of the answer, Vicky. A question and answer. The being gone over is being gone over. The being gone over is one thing, the is being gone over is another. Would not be complete, thus Nagarjuna says, which is just, thus Nagarjuna says, or in this, probably in this way really. Uchite, he's, it is said, which means it is said by him. For whoever asserts going on the being gone over, it follows, really, it follows, would be better. that there is a being going over lacking going. For the being going over is being going over. You see, if the action of going exists as concretely as we experience it, then it should be able to withstand this kind of analysis. This is the crux of this analysis coming to make sense. Otherwise, as Professor Robinson himself said, this professor, great guy, very smart, who wrote a book called Early Madhyamaka in India and China. He said that Nagarjuna's analyses were a shell game, a fake game. He's right in there with Donald Trump. He's a big guy and very strong. And when I went to Wisconsin, he was in we were on the 12th or 14th floor, I think the 12th of Van Hise Hall. One of the new buildings at the University of Wisconsin. And he was walking up to the 12th floor by the fire stairs in order to lose some weight. And he was still, he had some fat on him. And he was a person who believed in making his point known, no matter what his point was. He was somebody who was pushed around by his shorter father. He's from Canada. I believe from the Toronto area. And he was pushing back. And he and I came to get along very well. Because I was willing to push back if I knew something. Not to push back loudly, but if I knew something, I would say it. And a shell game, I played a shell game with an Indian fake guy outside where I was staying. This was at Kashmir Cottage, back in the days when it was a hotel run not by anybody in the Dalai Lama's family. It was owned by the private office, but rented out to somebody who made money from it. And this Indian came and he was playing the shell game, where you'd move around. You'd put a pea in, and you'd move it around, and he was betting with me, I guess. And I had to know where the pea was. He'd move it around like this. And I beat him a number of times. And he walked away. I beat him at his shell game. But shell game means fake. And as Robinson put it, these are positions that nobody ever held. In India. the question is, how do these positions apply to how we, in our everyday experience, perceive objects, on how objects appear to us, how going and coming appears to us, and how we, without analysis, accept that appearance, and how our emotions are based on that appearance. And in Gelugpa, the really tremendously effective psychological doctrine is that if things exist the way they appear, they would have to satisfy these criteria. If things exist as concretely as they appear, so concretely, they would have to be findable under this kind of analysis. This kind of analysis is sufficient to find something that's inherently existent. And if it's not findable this way, you have one person going, and if there's one going, and it's used up by the area gone over, then the is going, there's not going to be any is going. And if that person is a goer, there's not going to be any going to make that person a goer. Wow, it's if things exist, so far from being a faked up, made up, airy, we used to call it airy-fairy, made up thing where you have to choose this, choose that, that nobody ever thought of. This is applying, this has, this, these airy-fairy choices have an application to how things appear to us in raw sensation. That's the challenge. Do they? So you see, when people think that if you, well, it can't be this and it can't be that and it's not this and it's not that, oh yeah, I know how this reasoning works. And so then going doesn't ultimately exist, and oh yeah, I understand that, or I understand some modern philosophy about language, so I understand this already. You don't know nothing. Whether you learn this from superficial Buddhism, superficial Madhyamaka, or whether you learn this from superficial, other philosophies of the world, superficial in this sense, where it's not clicking and flooding your emotions, undermining them, you have not gotten anywhere. So, number one, it's somewhat hard to figure out what these reasonings are, and then all the harder to figure out how things are appearing to us in our everyday life. And then how these two go together. That's why it's emptiness yoga, and why it takes a lot of sense of humor and sense of ordinariness for it to work. Okay? See you next week.